Ryan, what's going on, man? Good to see you again.
Yeah, good to see you too. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, well, I was going to say round three, but it's not really round three because how many books have you written?
This is 10,
10.
9 or
Yeah, see, I was
10.
way off, man. I was way
Yes.
off. It's round three in what I would consider the Stoic series. Is that a fair assessment?
Yeah, I don't refer to it as the Stoic trilogy, but it is a trilogy of 3 books: Obstacle is the Way, Ego is the Enemy, and now Stillness is the Key.
Yeah, I was really curious why you chose stillness because there's a lot of virtues, there's a lot of principles that you could have chosen, and yet you
Sure.
chose stillness. What is it about stillness?
Well, I don't know if an author so much chooses the book or the book chooses them. I think for me, stillness is this timeless idea that appears in almost all the ancient schools. And yet when you say that word, it feels very urgent and timely. I think we're all sort of busier than we've ever been before. We're all trying to get to that thing that Cal Newport calls deep work. We're trying to get to a place where, as crazy as things are on the outside, we can be sort of calm and clear on the inside so we can do what's important, whether that's being a father or being an author or being, whatever you are trying to do in this life. So I think what I'm trying to do in the book, or why I wanted to write it, was there's this thing that people have struggled with for thousands of years, and they've come up with some good strategies for tackling it. And yet, we've forgotten a lot of those principles, and we kind of need this. We need that idea. We need that stillness more than ever.
Yeah, it seems to me that when it comes to behavior, if popular society seems to be going one way, that we ought to consider or at least look at maybe going the other way.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, look, I have a quote in the book in the intro from Blaise Pascal where he says, all of humanity's problems stem from our inability to sit quietly in a room alone. And, that was true 500 years ago, certainly true now. I guess the question, to go to your point, is, are you going to continue along with this sort of wave of frenetic energy and outrage and busyness and overwhelmingness and sort of excitability and misery, or are you going to look backwards and see, maybe there's a better way of living?
How do you feel that we as a society have gotten to the point where it is chaos and outrage and stimulus and inputs and everything that we're dealing with?
Yeah, I mean, look, technology is obviously a huge part of it, but when I open the book with this story of Seneca, who right around the turn of, as we switch from BC to AD, so it's a very long time ago, he's sitting in this apartment in Rome trying to write, and he's just talking about how noisy it is outside, just how busy life is and how hard it is to concentrate and focus and do what he needs to do. So I think it is this timeless thing. We don't want to focus. We don't want to give everything we have to whatever we're doing for a lot of reasons. And then when you add on top of that technology and commerce and all these sort of modern conveniences, you end up in a world that makes Seneca's or Blaise Pascal's world seem quaint and quiet by comparison. But the truth is, if we were to zoom backwards in time, we'd have trouble sitting quietly alone in a room too. The mind just doesn't want to go there.
Yeah, I wonder if it's just in our nature to continue to progress and move forward. And in a lot of ways, and I've fallen prey to this, is believing that action is prudent, right? That if I'm
Yeah,
moving, if I'm
sure.
going forward, then I'm doing something and it's by default productive when maybe that's not really the case.
Well, I think we have this sort of existential uh, aversion to the present, right? We want to think about what's happened in the past, want to dwell on our childhood. We want to dwell on what somebody said to us this morning. We want to relive our glory days, or we want to worry about things that are way off in the future, or we want to plan what we're going to do next. or think about how this is going to go before it happens, all of which is a way of avoiding what's right in front of you, which is this sort of present moment. And the truth is, the present moment is the only place that you can really do anything, right? Like we fantasize about love or greatness or accomplishment or whatever way off in the future. But the truth is, the only way you get there is by, engaging with what's right in front of you. And so, when I'm talking about stillness, I'm not talking about stillness in this sort of Zen Buddhist way necessarily, where it's like, go, move to an ashram or head to a monastery. I'm talking about how do you use stillness to be better at being a podcaster. I mean, like the amount of interviews I do where it's so clear that the person isn't listening to me, but thinking about their next question.
Yeah.
Or thinking about some argument they had with their wife, earlier that day, or they're thinking about the noise that's going on outside, or, and those are not the good interviews. The good interviews are where the person is locked in, where they're focused, where it's a real conversation, where they've given up a little bit of the control and they're willing to go where it takes. All of that is, unique to podcasting, but you don't write a good book, thinking about, whether you're going to make the bestseller list or not. You make a good book because you were totally engaged in the sentence you were writing in that moment. So it's all about being present, I think, at the core of it.
I think you bring up a good point because, I'm somebody that prides myself on being effective and efficient and wanting to move the needle and wanting to get things done. And I think you probably are like that. I think most of the guys listening are like that. And so when we hear this idea of stillness, the conclusion that you might jump to on the surface is, oh, now I've got to go meditate and pick up some Buddhist practices. And I'm like, I don't have time for that. Which is funny because it's kind of a paradox based on what the book is all about.
Yeah, look, I'm not saying it's not good to be effective and driven and hardworking. I'm actually saying that what you need is some stillness to be better at that thing. And look, I don't think the Eastern religions have done themselves any favors, right? They do talk about meditation as if it's the sort of end all be all. You even look at the imagery. It's like, I remember when they were putting together the cover of the book, they picked all these sort of Zen images, and it's like a stone, stacked on top of some other stones, or it's like, ripples in water, or what. Like these are not the images of a doer, but it's important to realize that many of the most well-known practitioners of Buddhism were princes and kings, or archers, or samurai warriors. Just as on the sort of Western side, the really great philosophers were not these nerds who loved books. They were the emperor. They were writers. They were politicians. They were businessmen. They were people existing in the real world. So stillness, to me, is not this abstraction. Stillness is what John F. Kennedy is calling on in the Cuban Missile Crisis. It's what a baseball player is thinking about as they step up to the plate. It's what a hedge fund trader is needing to think about as the market is whipsawing up and down. Stillness is what we need in our actual life. You think about the difference between a grandparent and a parent. A parent is running around with their head cut off trying to manage it all. The grandparent, a little wiser, a little older, a little more experienced, is able to sort of slow things down. They don't get worked up as easily. They don't, we have to go here. It has to be this way.
Right.
So stillness is this thing that will make you better at everything you're doing, whether it's personal or professional or everything in between.
I'm glad you talked about the baseball player, and you've got a lot of good stories in here that tie into perfectly how successful people have used these principles to achieve more. It reminds me, there's a movie with Kevin Costner. I think it's For Love of the Game. I think it's what it is. And he's got relationship issues with his wife, and they're going through a deal. And then he's pitching in the baseball game, and he's throwing this perfect game. And his trigger, for lack of a better term, is clear the mechanism.
Sure.
which the way that they portrayed it in the video or in the movie is that everything else is drowned out. It's all
Yeah.
silenced. It's all drowned out. And he's very hyper focused on that one thing and ends up, well, I don't want to give any spoilers, the old movie, but he ends up throwing a perfect game.
Yeah, no, and that's what you have to do. You like the things that we are trying to do professionally are difficult enough, right? Trying to write a book or make a movie or pull off an investment or start a company or be president, whatever it is, it's already really hard. The idea that you can succeed at that while your mind is preoccupied with a bunch of other unrelated things is just insane. And I do talk about baseball a lot in the book because baseball is, it's not my favorite sport, but baseball is the act of hitting in baseball may be the single hardest act in all of sports, right? In the sense that you have something like 400 milliseconds to identify a pitch and swing at it. It's just incredible. The ball leaves the pitcher's hand, who's like 60 some feet away, at 100 miles an hour. It's coming into a tiny window, and you've got to hit it with a freaking piece of wood. I mean, it's insane, right? You have a fraction of a fraction of a fraction of a second to identify that. If you're thinking about what you're going through in your personal life, if you're thinking about what the coach thinks about you, if you think about what they're saying about you on Twitter, if you're even thinking about the pitch that you just swung and missed at, you are taking away not just valuable real estate, but like critical real estate from the one thing that you are trying to do. And the margin for error there is so small that you can't afford to waste that. So it's, in some ways, the stillness is, and this clarity, this emptying the mind, it's not just this thing you do in meditation. It's a resource allocation issue. It's a performance strategy for sports and life and again, everything in between.
Yeah. I mean, let's riff on this baseball thing a little bit more, because one of the principles that you talk about, do you call them principles? One of the strategies, I don't remember what you call them.
Yeah, sure. Whatever.
Is to have a routine. And if you think about, for example, a batter coming up to the plate, he is going through the exact same routine, the way that he is on deck and taking his warm-up swings, the way that he steps into the batter's box, how he lines himself up with the plate, the movements that he does with his shoulders or his hips, and where he places the bat. It's all a calculated, deliberate routine. I imagine, I know part of the reason that is, but I imagine also it's so that he can free up the real estate to focus more heavily on the important thing, like the timing or the release of the ball,
sure.
et cetera.
Yeah, no, it's about getting into the zone. It's about clearing the mind. Like, look, they've done studies, those weights that batters put on the end of the bat, that has like demonstrably no impact on swing whatsoever. Like, it may even be harmful, right? It doesn't help.
Because it changes everything.
Yeah, but the process of doing it is why they keep doing it. And it's the same for a lot of the superstitions that you see athletes go through. Obviously, wearing this pair of socks, or touching their helmet this way, or Russell Westbrook does the same routine after he shoots a free throw, and he starts his warm up at the same time, and he eats the same peanut butter and jelly sandwich. It's the same. It's about not only getting into the right frame of mind, but it's a tool for when that equilibrium is shattered or violated, so you miss the free throw. It's almost like like my kid has an Etch-a-Sketch, and you some of them you can shake, but this one, it has like a slide. You just you slide it up and it clears the palette. That's what a lot of these rituals are about. It's about sort of starting fresh. So you're like, I messed up, but I'm not going to stay with that. I'm going back into the routine and I'm starting over. So these routines are really a better way to talk about them is as rituals. They're sort of ritualistic in the way that you light a candle when you go into a church, or you say a certain chant or a prayer. It's about sort of getting into the right headspace and being able to access that on demand. Yeah,
that on demand is huge, because so many of us, we fly by the seat of our pants. We're very reactional. We're very emotional. Sure. right? And so we allow these things to cloud what would otherwise be a very rational human being, and it ends up becoming a problem in a lot of ways.
Yeah, I think it's about taking some control over your environment and your life and your process rather than being reactionary. Like I don't like people who write in coffee shops. I don't understand, because to me this is way too chaotic and it's way too uncertain and it allows for interruption. For me, it's like I go to a place, I sit down at that place, I start and I stay there till I'm done. I'm not running around doing 15 things at the same time. You need to have some control over the process and the environment. The stillness is not natural, right? It's a place you have to work yourself into.
Is there a place though for some of that sporadic, that chaotic,
Sure.
whether it's at Starbucks or whatever? Because I tend to be a very methodical person, right? So
Yeah.
if I've got something, I'm going to do step A and then B and then C. And if I do that, I know it's going to work. And if it doesn't work, I can figure out where it doesn't work so I can fix it.
Yeah.
I don't migrate that way, but I know a lot of people do.
I think you have to have room for flexibility. Of course, like I think about it less as having a daily routine and having daily routines plural. So if my kid wakes up late, I'm not like freaking out because now the whole thing is you have to have some. I heard a great word from a female author whose name I'm forgetting, but she said you have to have respondability. Like, can you respond to the things that happen? I think this is really important. So you don't want to be so rigid and fragile in your routine that there's no room for life or Murphy's Law. There's no slack there for you to absorb any of that. But at the same time, if you're just winging it all the time, you're not going to get your best work.
Yeah. I guess there's the balance, and then what you're ultimately trying to accomplish as well.
Sure.
You were talking about, so I've got the book right here. You were talking about the cover. What's the significance of the sun? Why choose that then over the rock or whatever else you could have chosen?
Yeah, I just wanted something that sort of catches your attention, that sort of has this idea of radiating outward, but not in the way that a ripple in a pond is insignificant. The sun is the most important thing in our universe. I wanted to talk about how I wanted to sort of capture this idea of stillness being this thing that we possess, but that we send outward. Sort of it radiates around us. So it doesn't have a ton of meaning in particular. Part of what a cover is there to do is just to catch your attention. But what I didn't want to perpetuate some of the sort of tropes or stereotypes of the Eastern side of things.
Sure. I do like that you talk about radiating outwards, because one of the things that we talk a lot about is working on ourselves as men, improving yourself, focusing on yourself, giving yourself the time and attention you deserve. But it's not an entirely selfish endeavor. We do that so that we can more effectively impact other people's lives in the positive, our kids, our wife, our colleagues, employees, whoever it may be. So I do like the idea of stillness not being this idea of retreating indefinitely, but creating an environment where you can do your best work. You talked about Cal Newport, who's been on the podcast a couple of times, so that hopefully you can go out and then serve others more effectively. Ultimately, that's why we're here, to help each other out.
Yeah, no, I think that's right. I think anyone who's been around a particularly sort of still or wise person has recognized how you can almost just feel that. It's just sort of coming off of them. You're just in the same, they say in the military, right? Like calm is contagious. You can feel that when you're around people who've just got a lock on themselves and who they are and what they're doing. And so, yeah, I think a big part of the book is this is not about moving to a monastery. This is not about retreating to your library. This is about how do you have stillness in the real world, and how do you model it for other people, whether that's your children or your friends or your colleagues or whatever. If the leader of an organization or a family is freaking out and losing their mind all the time, that's going to affect other people. It's going to make it very hard for them to maintain their cool, for them to be calm. Kids pick up on your anxiety, they pick up on your insecurities, They pick up on your franticness. They pick up when you're overwhelmed in ways that you often don't even understand. I mean, like you sometimes we'll go like, oh, why is our son not sleeping? Or why is our baby having, it's because the house is just filled with stress.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? They're just picking up that energy. Dogs are the same way. Like if you're in a shitty mood, your dog, you can almost see it reflected in the pets that live in your house. And so this doesn't have to get sort of too woo-woo about energy, but the truth is like these things manifest themselves in our lives physically, in our body language, and just the sort of mood that we're giving off. And so we have to be able to figure out how to control and contain that.
Yeah, I was, it's funny because as you talk about the chaos that kids pick up on, I was with somebody that I know, and their kids were being loud and rambunctious and being children, but they were off the walls. I mean, they really were.
Sure.
And the mom says, I can't understand why my kids are like this, blah, 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 blah. And she's freaking out. And in my mind, like right here, I'm like,
of course.
Really?
Yeah.
You don't understand and can't see why your kids are acting like that as you're acting like the grown-up version of them right now?
Sure.
It's hard for us to see when we're doing it ourselves.
Well, look, and to go back to this idea of routines, if you want some illustration of the power and importance of routine, like try raising a kid with no structure and no routine, right? Mm-hmm. Or have it and then just throw it out the window one day. And all of a sudden they're having meltdowns, they're not sleeping, they're doing things they know they're not supposed to do because that life is overwhelming, right? There's so many choices. I mean, you could do anything you want at any time, essentially, right? Mm-hmm. And so think about it, an adult who has even more, freedom than a child, to be faced with all of that is overwhelming and intimidating, and I think we act out. And so Eisenhower, I think he said something like freedom is best expressed as the opportunity for self-discipline. And I think with kids, it's like, no, you've got, like, this is the time that we wake up. This is what we do in the morning. This is when we have breakfast. This is when you go to school. This is what we do after school. And that structure allows them to calm down and to sort of get a handle on themselves because there's just less for them to think and worry about.
Yeah, it's really fascinating you bring up the discipline thing, because I think on the surface, a lot of people hear that and think, well, discipline, restriction, right? It's not liberating, it's restricting. But you have guys like, I think you said Eisenhower, who had that quote. You have Aristotle 2,000 years ago, through discipline comes freedom. Jocko Willink, discipline equals freedom. Sure. These are highly successful men who have figured out that discipline isn't designed to limit necessarily. It's voluntary restriction, I guess you'd say. But ultimately, it creates the freedom for what you want to do. And you hit on that when you talk about learning to say no and limiting your options or your endeavors, the things that you're pursuing.
Yeah, totally. You've got to. Freedom is misery. Complete freedom is misery. Anyone that's experienced it knows that. You got to have purpose. You got to have direction. You got to have structure. Because if you don't, you have no stillness. You just have chaos and disorder.
Yeah, no, that's true. So how do you then, because I think a lot of people will buy into the idea of limiting and saying no. It's something I've been sharing for quite a while now and something I've gotten better at. How do you, what filters do you place choices and activities through in order to determine, is this something that I should engage in, or should I disengage so that I can create some more margin in my life?
Yeah, I think there's a number of filters. I mean, the first one is like, do I actually have to do this or not? I think so many people sort of unthinkingly do things because other people do them, or they unthinkingly want things because other people seem to want them, right? So why do you live in New York City? Well, everyone in my industry lives in New York City. Do you actually have to live there? Would it cost you money if you move? No, I could do whatever I do. And so it's like, is this thing optional or not? Is I think the first rule. The second is do I want to do it or not? Does it get me closer or further away from the life that I want to lead? Yes or no, right? And then another way to think about it, or a third thing is what is the best way to do this, right? So a lot of people, I'm just always surprised at how how little they have in the way of systems. So a routine is like, hey, this is how I structure my day. But a system is like, this is the way I do X, whether it's writing a book or prepare for interviews or, research an investment deal, whatever it is that you're doing. Like, what is your system? It can't just be, you walk in, you see people's desk and it's like just piles of garbage and they've got 50 different inboxes that they're monitoring and the phone's ringing off the hook and it's blah, blah, blah. Like, of course you're overwhelmed. Of course you're not, getting the best performance you can get out of yourself. No, like you got to create a system that you operate by. And then you have to apply that system to the essential things, having eliminated the inessential things.
I think that being a systemized person probably is a bit inherent in different individuals, right? That might be a strength for them. For example, I imagine you are a systems guy. I've used your systems for writing a book with the note cards and having the filing system. Is this something that you naturally gravitate towards, this idea of stillness and systems, or is this something that you've had to cultivate and develop?
Well, look, I think there are certainly minds that are more systematic than others. That, as they look at the sort of Asperger's spectrum, they find that sort of systematic mindset in the very extremes is what Asperger's is, and then the lack of it is sort of its own extreme. But like, I wasn't born researching books using physical note cards, right?
Sure.
Like somebody taught me that system, and then putting in the work, doing laying the groundwork for that system, I was able to start to get a return on that investment. And then it's the same as an analogy. I think this applies to systems. Tyler Cowen was once asked, like, how can I read as quickly as you? And he was like, read thousands of books. And what he meant was that because he's read all these other books, he's able to breathe through books because his base of knowledge is so strong that he's not learned things that you're reading this book and you're having to look up all these names and you don't really know what's going on. You don't have a sense of where the story's going. Whereas someone like him who's put in his thousands and thousands of hours has a base of knowledge and skills that allows him to sort of cut through the task more quickly. And so I think systems are something that, sure, you might have a natural inclination or a natural aversion to them, but it's in building the system and then sticking to the system through multiple iterations that you start to get more and more benefit, and it becomes a virtuous cycle. I research books that way because I'm now familiar with it, and I also just have all this research that I can move and plug around, and that's why it works for me.
Yeah, I mean, I've got compliments like, oh, you're great at podcasting or interviewing. How do you must have been born, just a natural communicator. I'm like, no. In fact, I told somebody this a couple of weeks ago. In school, they used to call me the hermit because I didn't want to talk with people. I didn't want to engage. I didn't want to go out. I'm like, I wasn't born that way. Well, how do you get good at it? You do it a lot, and then you review it and correct along the way. I mean, same with how do you get better at pull-ups? You do more pull-ups, and then you'll get better at it.
Yeah, look, I think that a natural aptitude certainly helps for kicking off that cycle. I mean, but if you were trying to learn a habit or correct a bad habit, you'd start by doing it the way it's supposed to be done. And the more you do it, the more natural it becomes and the greater confidence you build in your ability to do it that way.
Yeah. So with the book, and I've got some notes here, but with the book, the way that you broke it down is really 3 primary segments. So you have mind, body, soul.
Yep.
And then within each one of those, you have these different principles or strategies, whatever you want to call them. How did you identify those? How did you whittle it down and narrow it down to the strategies that you decided to include in the book itself?
Well, so mind, body, soul is clearly not a distinction that I made up. That's a pretty sort of common sort of delineation of the sort of parts of life. And so I'm a pretty big fan of a 3-part structure. I think it helps the readers sort of, the other books in that series also on a 3-part structure. So I was sort of looking for something along those lines. But what you tend to find as you research, and again, this goes to the idea of systems, the systems tends to create patterns. So you're researching, you're exploring, you're experiencing things that are related to this idea, and you're accumulating material, but that material is going naturally sort of towards these little pools of, hey, these are examples of a higher power. These are examples of clearing the mind. These are examples of being present. These are examples of having a routine. These are examples of the power of hobbies. You know, whatever it happens to be, there's different ones. And you just sort of start to accumulate. And then as you accumulate, you refine and you concentrate. And again, a book there's obviously a huge sort of conscious shaping of it, but it's also a thing that kind of ensues. It's a little bit like music. You know, you sit down and you've practiced and you have something you're trying to express, but you're also just sort of following whatever it is leads you.
And that's, that as you say that, it's interesting because I think when people think of creative types, they think it's all like that. But what I've experienced is that the more structure you have, the systems, for example, you're talking about, the more you make way and room for the creativity to flow and the path to just go. And that might be a level of confidence knowing that, hey, we're going to explore this avenue. We may not ultimately go down that path, but we have room to explore it through the systems and processes that you've created.
Yeah, that's right. That's what routine and order and research is about. So you're not sitting down and going, what am I writing about today? Let's see where this takes me. What you are doing is sitting down and going, I'm writing a chapter about the power of walking, or I'm writing a chapter about, controlling your temper. And then I have this material here in front of me that these are sort of the root notes that I want to build around, or these are the things that I think I want to include, but let's see where this goes. Mm-hmm. And so it's sort of riffing inside of a structure that you've built, even if that structure is somewhat temporary. Chapters end up changing and going in different directions all the time. But yeah, that's how that works.
Yeah, it makes sense. I mean, you got to have some level of parameters. Otherwise, it's going to look like just a bowl of spaghetti thrown against the wall. It won't be very attractive, right?
Well, I talk to some writers and they'll be like, oh yeah, no, I wrote 150,000 words for my manuscript. And then, the published book was 70,000 words. And you're like, so you wrote an extra book that threw in the trash.
Almost 2 extra books.
Yeah. That's not a good system. Like that's what, so doing the work from the system might seem like less fun, or it might seem a bit onerous, but what it's saving you is all the blind alleys and the overlap and the unnecessary things that you didn't need to do in the first place.
Yeah. I can see how it's a much more efficient way. Outside of efficiency, and my math was off a little bit there with the 2 extra books, so forgive me. But outside of the efficiency of doing it this way, having some systems and the stillness, what are some other benefits that you've experienced as you've incorporated these principles into your life?
You mean like artistically, or do you mean like stillness generally in my life?
Yeah, more stillness, more the principles and the practices that you outline in the book.
Yeah, I mean, look, I don't think there's anyone that doesn't know what that word stillness means when they hear it.
Sure.
Right? And I think we can think of moments in our life when we've experienced it. It was sitting out on a porch swing, or it was, watching the snow fall, or it was that moment that you wrote something, or you had that idea that changed your life, or it was that conversation that, you think back to quite often. We know what these moments of stillness are like, and yet they're just like so rare. And it's weird, as special as they are and as meaningful as they are to us. It seems weird to me that we just let them happen randomly. We're just like content for them to happen randomly. So for me, stillness, it obviously is sort of deeply personal, and there's moments that I have in my life that are difficult for me to express. A lot of them were quite ordinary, where I was just there, and I just thought, I love this, I want more of this. So there's lots of moments like that, but really I think about it a lot professionally. Like, I don't do good work if I am in the middle of, sort of enviously comparing myself to another person, right? I don't have much happiness or freedom in my life if I'm going around, just saying yes to every inquiry and ask and, obligation that the world is throwing at me. So I think stillness for me is about sort of slowing things down, taking control of your life, and then, as we were talking about earlier, sort of directing everything you have at whatever is important to you. So whether that's hanging out with my family or whether that's, completing a manuscript, it's ultimately about, bringing the best of yourself to what you're doing.
Yeah, it's when you mentioned the idea of these experiences are ordinary, it just reminded me or made me think of like not Instagram worthy, right? And
Yes.
that's one of the traps that I think, gosh, so many people fall into. I fall into it where it's like, I'm reading books with my kids, and although maybe it's not real exciting for Instagram, it's satisfying, it's fulfilling. I don't need to convince anybody that this is what I should be doing or impress anybody with my reading abilities to my children. Like, it just isn't something I feel inclined to share or have a desire to.
Yeah, so one of the sites I created this site called Daily Dad, and it's an email that goes out for dads every day. And one of the first ones that I wrote about, I wrote about something I actually heard from Jerry Seinfeld in an interview. He was talking about how parents think and speak a lot about quality time. They're like, I got to have quality time with my kids. It's all about having these quality experiences. And he's like, quality? He's like, the best time is, he calls it garbage time. He's like, garbage time is like staying up until 3 a.m. just like watching TV on the couch, or it's sitting there eating cereal, or it's driving home from school. Like, we go and we seek out these extra special moments. Travel is a great example of this. People go, I'm so miserable, I hate my job, I need to get on a plane and I need to fly to Europe. Or I need to get on a plane and I need to fly to Bali. And once I'm there, then I will be happy and good. And it's like, of course you won't, because you are bringing yourself along with you.
Brought the baggage.
Yeah.
The literal and figurative baggage.
Yeah. Baggage is more than just what you put in the overhead compartment. Baggage is what we're carrying around with us. So this idea that you need to go somewhere else or do something else or be someone else or accomplish something else to be happy or to be still, that's like one of the most insidious myths out there. The real happiness and the real stillness comes from accessing sort of what you already possess.
It seems like you've created that a little bit for yourself in your home environment. What little I do see on Instagram, I see you on the farm or the ranch, and I see you call it a farm or a ranch.
Either way.
Okay. And I see you with the donkeys, right? And so I'm like, oh, this is somebody who's created something that isn't necessarily like this popular thing, although it brings a sense of joy and satisfaction and fulfillment in his life. Yeah,
look, my son and I went on a 7-mile bike ride on a dirt road this morning, like looking at cows and just hanging out. And I did that on my phone. I left my phone inside. It was early in the morning. We watched the sun come up. There was no one bothering us. There was nothing going on. We were just sort of present and experiencing just like the it wasn't like the greatest sunrise of all time. And it wasn't, through the Grand Canyon. It was just, an ordinary experience. And yet it's also deeply sort of special and meaningful if you choose for it to be that.
Sure. I think, though, the natural inclination for the average person is to say something like, well, that's easy for you to say, or that's
right.
easy for you to do because you've created this business and you make this income and you have
sure.
this lifestyle. But I have to go to work. I have to do this. I have these obligations,
sure.
responsibilities. Somehow they think they're different.
Yeah, it is interesting. On the one hand, yeah, sure. All of us are privileged in the sense that we're alive right now as opposed to 100 years ago or 1,000 years ago. We're privileged that we're talking here in America. We're privileged that we're talking in a time of peace. Yeah, we're privileged that we're not a persecuted minority or any of these things. But it is interesting, me being able to go on a bike ride with my son in the morning, that wasn't I wasn't able to do that because I'm rich. I'm able to. That didn't cost anything. You know what I mean? I could do that anywhere at any time. That walk could have been through the parking lot at the daycare before he goes in the morning. It could have been. There's so many circumstances in which the exact same experience could be had, and I think what people don't realize is that it's not privilege that creates these moments, as in you have this because of all you have. It's that those moments are possible because of the things that I say no to, right? Because I choose not to be traveling this week, or because I choose not to be doing X, Y, or Z to make extra money. It's not that I don't need those things or want those things. It's that I chose this thing instead of that thing. And everyone has that power. Obviously, there's variability. I'm riding a nicer bicycle than I would if I worked at McDonald's. I'm coming back to a nicer house than if X, Y, or Z. But I also made a lot of decisions in my life to prioritize this thing versus another thing.
I think it's so important that you're talking about conscious decision, because a lot of people, what they'll do is they'll subject themselves to the mercy of their environment. Like, I had to do it. I have to. It's like, well, you didn't have to. You made that decision for a reason.
Sure.
The thing that I think a lot of people fall prey to is this fear of missing out thing, right?
Yeah, of course.
Because they're not conscious about their life. Like, my thought is that if there's a party or a concert or a conference or whatever it is that you feel like you're missing out on, that you haven't made a conscious decision to deliberately say no to this because you want to spend time with your kids, or
Sure.
because you want to write your novel that you're in the process of, or practice the guitar, or hunt, or do whatever it is you do. Make those conscious decisions starts to address that issue of fear of missing out.
Yeah, I think that's right. And look, part of the lifestyle decision I made by sort of living where I live, which is in Texas instead of California or New York, is that there is less for me to have to say no to, right? Like, that was that decision. Sure, it's much cheaper to live where I live, which allows certain freedoms. But I don't know if I could put a number on it. But certainly, the decision to not live in Los Angeles or New York has a very real financial implication for me. I literally am missing out on a number of deals or projects or relationships by nature of not being in those places. But because I'm not aware of what I'm missing out on, I don't think about it, right? And so it becomes easier to say, no, I don't want to go to that dinner tonight if I live in Texas than if I live in New York City. Because in New York City, it's 16 blocks away, and I feel much more obligated to attend. It's probably not going to rise to the level of importance that I want to get on a plane to go to a dinner. But if it is, that is probably really important.
Trip, right?
Yeah. So putting some artificial constraints and filters, as we've been talking about, has some benefits in ways that people don't often think about, but have a huge impact on your quality of life.
Yeah, I mean, I think it also has to do with a healthy realization or expectation of the cost of doing something. And there's a cost, right? There's a cost of not doing something, right? If you don't go to LA and take that deal, that's a lost opportunity cost. But if you did, what would be the cost of doing it, right? There's a cost of action and a cost of inaction, and you have to weigh those things consciously.
Yeah. And you have to be intentional. I think what we're talking about is how do you intentionally live your life rather than just get sort of whipsawed around by what showed up in your inbox. I like, as a more benign version, like, one of the reasons I think spending less time on social media is good is then you are choosing your mood rather than the algorithm deciding to show you a tweet from Donald Trump 6 minutes after you woke up, which happens to be upsetting to you.
Right.
Or conversely, it could be a tweet from, like, this has no political implications whatsoever. People wake up, they pull up Instagram, and then they see so-and-so is doing better than them, and now they are unhappy. And so this sort of letting your mood be determined by random inputs is a really fragile place to be, and a place that I don't find leads to much happiness.
Do you feel like you've scaled back? I mean, Instagram is where I'm most active, and I don't see a whole lot of engagement from you there. Do you feel like you've deliberately scaled back on the social media usage?
Very, very much so, and very intentionally. In January, I quit Facebook. So I still have an account that someone manages for me as part of my business. But then I don't personally have an account that I use to check my feed. I found that had a huge impact on my happiness and my productivity. I don't use any social media on my phone. So I check Twitter occasionally on my computer. I see if someone that I need to talk to has sent me a message or whatever. And then on Instagram, I have an account. I post on it regularly, but I don't have it on my phone. It's on my wife's phone. And so, I'll text her a picture and say, hey, will you post this when you get a sec? Or I'll grab her phone when I get home and I'll do it real fast. But the idea is like, I don't want it within arm's reach of myself at all times. It's like, look, some people can drink and some people can't drink. And you've got to know like what the different mediums, what effect the different mediums have on you personally. Some people can watch the news and not be upset by it. Other people like me get made very unhappy and miserable by the news. So I don't watch a lot of news either. That's not to say I'm not informed. I just choose the mediums through which I get my information.
Right. No, that's a great point. And it's funny because I've heard people say things like, if you have to place those restrictions on alcohol or social media use or whatever it is, that it's weakness. And I'm like, it's not weakness to set up parameters and systems to keep you on a path that you've chosen to walk. Like that's a tool at your disposal. That doesn't make you weak. It actually makes you a master of that thing.
Yeah, I would think it's the opposite of weakness. Choosing to lift a heavy weight or choosing not to eat X, Y, or Z is an exercise of strength, both willpower and then literal muscular strength.
Yeah, great point. I made a couple of little asterisks by some of these topics that I wanted to discuss with you. Like saying no, I think we've hit that one pretty well. One of the ones that you did just briefly mention was accepting a higher power. Can you talk with me a little bit about that?
Yeah, so I'm not someone who's religious. I don't go to church. I've been an atheist most of my life, most of my adult life. But when you look at the literature about stillness and when you read history, the inescapable conclusion is that most of the wisest, stillest, calmest people believed in some kind of higher power, whether that was the universe, whether that was what the Stoics called the logos, whether that was fate, whether that's a Christian God or the gods plural for the ancient Greeks, the idea of some kind of higher power. And look, there's a reason in 12-step programs they ask you to accept a higher power, because it's about surrender, it's about letting go, it's about giving up some of the destructive control we have over ourselves. And it's about, I think, ultimately humility. And so this isn't that I don't write my books from a place of necessarily my own sort of full belief, but I write them from a place of where I'm trying to go and get. And so this is something I think about a lot, and I'm working on myself, and I'm constantly sort of exploring and pursuing different avenues. But yeah, ultimately, I think it's very hard to be still as a nihilist, or less so as an atheist. But I think still believing that there's no purpose to anything, that it's all meaningless and random, is a hard pill to swallow.
So at this stage in your life, how would you describe your higher power?
I would say I've probably been an atheist since college, and I think as I've researched and thought about this more, I've moved sort of firmly in the camp of being an agnostic, which in the true sense means you just don't know, right? It's not an atheist believes in the way that a Christian believes, that they know what the state of things is. So I've come to a place where it's like, I just don't know.
Mm-hmm.
And what I do know is that a huge, if not the vast majority of things that happen, I have absolutely no control over. And so it's not that someone is choosing those things necessarily, but I can admit quite readily that I'm not choosing those things. And so what you can accept is just this idea of sort of surrender, or a sense of submission to this idea that a large percentage of what's happening is just completely beyond us.
That's and isn't that so liberating? I mean, that's a very stoic thought, right? Control what you can control, let go of the uncontrollable, right?
Yeah.
I mean, but how liberating is it to say, you know, I'm not going to focus on the uncontrollables anymore. I mean, just think of what you eliminate from your plate just by accepting that thought right there alone.
Totally. You are taking. Most people are spending most of their time thinking about, worrying about, having opinions about things that are not up to them. And so if you can go, look, somebody's doing this, something is doing most of this, I'm just going to focus here on what I do control, which is mostly my own thoughts, my own actions, my own beliefs. I'm going to have more resources than those people.
It's funny because I think there's a lot of people out there who believe that, and I've had this because I wrote a book called Sovereignty, which is about claiming individual and personal responsibility for yourself.
Yes.
But at the same time, I happen to be spiritual and religious and believe in a Christian God.
Sure.
But I had a lot of people come back with, well, how do you reconcile being an individual, being sovereign, with submitting to a higher power? For me, I don't think they're at odds with each other. I think I've chosen as a sovereign man to walk that path.
Sure.
But
Look,
I have a hard time reconciling that.
Yeah. Look, you're still choosing, right? You're still choosing to do that. The Stoic sort of metaphor is they say that we're a dog tied to a cart or a wagon. So it's going, and you can choose to lay down and be dragged, or you can sort of cheerfully run alongside.
Interesting.
But the choice is yours, right? And I think that's a good way of thinking about it, because, you know, ultimately the world just doesn't care about you. It doesn't have an opinion about you. If you believe in God, ultimately you believe that God cares about you, but you can't, as much as he cares about you as an individual, you also have to look at history and look at all the horrible and surprising and, you know, undesirable things that have happened to millions and billions of people. So the idea that you're going to get everything that you want in this life is just, you know, ludicrous.
It is.
Any way you crack it, it comes back to this idea of some sort of submission to these larger forces, whatever they happen to be.
Yeah, it's interesting. It reminds me of in high school, I remember we got to a playoff game in baseball, and it was the first round of the playoffs. And we were up. We must have been up maybe 3 or 4-1. And I remember praying, saying, God, help us win this game. Yeah. And almost instantaneously, I also had the thought, there's guys in the other dugout right now that are praying for the same thing. So who does he pick?
Right.
And the conclusion I came to was he doesn't care. Whether you win this game or not is irrelevant in the grand scheme of things.
Yes.
I believe he wants you to be happy and fulfilled, just like a father would want his son to be happy and fulfilled.
Sure.
But I can't make my choices, I can't make my son's or my daughter's choices.
Right.
They have to make those choices, and I'll support however I can.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right.
Well, the other one that stuck out to me is in the soul component of things, and this is something I've personally dealt with, and I know a lot of men are dealing with this as well, is learning to conquer anger.
Yeah.
This is something a lot of men deal with, and I know that just through my own work and trying to let go of some resentment and animosity and things that are upsetting to me has been very liberating.
Yeah, I'm actually working on a course about this for dailystoic.com, like a sort of an anger-based challenge, which should come out pretty soon. But I everyone has anger, everyone has pain. I don't think there's anyone, there's no one who's ever lost their temper and thought, I'm really glad I did that. You know what I mean? That was really positive thing.
That really helped the situation.
Yeah. So anger is, that's not to say everyone has an anger problem, but anger is a problem for all of us at one time or another. And I would also say that it's the enemy of stillness, right? You cannot feel good while you are feeling anger. And that is the irony of anger, is that you are primarily the person who is punished by it, right? That's not to say that anger doesn't cause a lot of painful consequences for other people, but pick someone with a really bad temper and really bad anger and ask yourself, is it fun to be them, right? Like, and the answer is almost always no. Even though they could be very rich and very successful and have a wonderful life, anger is actually this thing that's, preventing them from enjoying that.
Do you think anger stems from, at its root, trying to control things that are beyond your control, or where would you say that stems from?
I think often it's from trying to control things you can't control. I think it's often rooted in taking things personally that have nothing to do with you. I think it's often sort of giving oneself over to one's emotions rather than being sort of intentional. So I think there's a lot of causes of anger, but I would say very few of them are healthy. There are almost always better ways to go. That's not to say anger can't be a tool. That's not to say, it can't have short-term benefits. It can certainly be a powerful motivator, but it often, turns getting whatever you wanted to get into being less enjoyable than it could be when you finally get it.
Yeah. Great point. The other thing I think about too with emotions, and this is something that's talked about quite a lot when it comes to men, is I don't know that I think it's okay to be angry and use that as emotion, as a tool, but to display anger is probably counterproductive. Like, you can be angry about something and then great. Now, what is your course of action?
Sure.
But to display it is, I think, where you start to get in trouble.
Yeah, although there's some exceptions to that rule too. I mean,
Sure.
I've talked to a lot of basketball coaches that sort of talk about how they'll use anger to fire up their team, or they'll get a technical on purpose to send a message. A leader can sometimes use targeted bits of anger, but the point is, and the anger shouldn't be leading. The anger should be, I don't want to say it's acting, but the anger is being deliberately used as a tool rather than you are in the sway of the anger and the anger is the thing making the decisions.
Yeah, controlling it rather than it controlling you.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah, because you talk about even with I think you went into Michael Jordan on the subject of anger and was he really angry? Did he use that anger? Like, how did that play out for him?
Right, exactly. Yeah. Yes, and when you watch the Michael Jordan Hall of Fame speech, you see just how toxic anger can end up being for people.
Yeah, if you let it consume you, if you use it correctly, again, powerful tool. That's why I tell people is there's not really a negative emotion. Like, emotions are there to serve us, even the ones that we would consider quote unquote negative. They're there to serve us and help us. It's what you do with it that determines whether it's negative or positive.
That's right.
Yeah. Well, Ryan, this has been fascinating. I know we talked about a bunch of different things, obviously, and I don't know, there's 30 something points in here we could talk about. We won't get to all of them for the sake of time, but just go buy the book. That's the easy answer. Just buy the book.
Yeah, please.
I want to ask you a couple of questions as we close things down.
Yes.
The first one is, what does it mean to be a man?
To me, a man is someone who takes care of what they have to take care of. A man is responsible for themselves, for their emotions. A man is responsible generally. I don't remember what I answered last time. I hope it's similar to that. But to me, a man sort of steps up and does what they need to do. So I don't necessarily even think it needs to be that gendered as a term. To me, being a man is doing what you got to do.
Right on. Appreciate it. How do we connect with you? Obviously, we can pick up a copy of the book on Amazon or wherever you're going to do your thing. But how do we connect more with you?
Yeah, so I'm at Ryan Holiday on pretty much most platforms. You can check out my site, which is ryanholiday.net. Daily Stoic is dailystoic.com, and then Daily Dad, which I hope everyone checks out. It probably, I think, would be a fit for this audience. I write it every single morning. It's just dailydad.com.
Perfect. And then you said there was an anger course of sorts coming out. Is that available yet? Or
it's not available yet, but it'll be up on dailystoic.com if you sign up for the email.
Right on. We'll sync everything up so the guys know where to go.
Thanks,
Brian,
man.
best
Appreciate
wishes on
it.
the launch, man. I
All
want to
right.
tell you, I appreciate you and all your work. It's been valuable in my life and certainly helped me be more stoic in my approach to family and business and everything else. It's served me greatly. So I appreciate it.
Awesome, man. Well, thanks for having me on again and for staying at me to do it. I'm glad I did.
You bet, brother.
Bye bye.